Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, December the 14th, 2023. So today I want to talk about a couple of anniversaries. The first thing I want to talk about is the discovery of plutonium. Now, plutonium was isolated on December the 14th, 1940. And I want to look at the horoscope for the isolation of plutonium. Now, you might think that is really obscure, but actually it's one of the most important charts there is in terms of understanding how astrology works and making the decision to actually use Pluto. If you've looked at, my astrological work and what I've been saying, you have perhaps noticed that I don't like to use too many points. I certainly don't like to use asteroids. And Pluto is a really small body. It's tiny. I mean, why should we use Pluto? I think Pluto does work. I think we should use Pluto. And the discovery of plutonium, the chart for the discovery of plutonium, I believe it was 8 p.m. on December the 14th, 1940, is really important. And that is a chart I want to look at. Another event I want to look at is something that happened 11 years ago. It's a shooting at Sandy Hook. I know it's a very tragic event, but as astrologers do need to look at these events, to see what was going on astrologically. To be honest, it's not that dramatic. I mean, obviously it was dramatic, but in terms of looking at the chart for when the shooting started, I think it's just after, was it 9:35 a.m., December the 14th. 2012 in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. It's not particularly spectacular, but nonetheless, I do want to look at that chart, and I also want to compare that chart with that of the United States, and I also want to consider one person who has been financially seriously damaged by Sandy Hook, and that's Alex Jones, the radio host, and his comments about Sandy Hook and his questioning that it actually happened have led to lawsuits, and I think the court said he had to pay $1.5 billion to the families of the victims of Sandy Hook. That is a huge amount of money. So I want to look at his horoscope very briefly, and I want to consider how the Sandy Hook shooting interacted with his horoscope, and why did he get so hung up on Sandy Hook that he got himself into a situation where he had to, I don't know, I suppose he's bankrupt. He must be. Is he bankrupt? I don't know, but he must be on the verge of bankruptcy or whatever. I'm not quite sure how it works legally. So those are some of the things I want to look at today. It's a bit chaotic. I'm sorry. Nonetheless, I should say that if you do like this video, then like it, and if you're not subscribed again and you like this video, then do feel free to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description to this video. But before I look at Sandy Hook and plutonium and Alex Jones, I want to look at the astrology for today, which is Thursday, December the 14th, 2023. Now, I do not think that it is a particularly spectacular day. Top right, that's Alex Jones. He was born in 1974. I was surprised how young he was, or is. Okay, so Sandy, yeah, sorry, for looking at the chart for today. Right, this is it. The moon is still in Capricorn. You can see that the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and it's made a conjunction to Mercury. And in terms of the main aspects, that's all there is. So in some respects, at least on the surface, it's not a particularly spectacular day. You know, Moon in Capricorn is very focused on the material details. It's quite solid. Okay, as I keep saying with Moon in Capricorn, it's quite self-interested. Mercury in Capricorn. Okay, Mercury in Capricorn is now going retrograde. But you know, Mercury in Capricorn is about thinking about the world in a very solid, materialistic kind of way. And then you've got Moon sextile Venus. We're able to relate to people well. Again, not in a particularly spectacular way, but yeah, on the surface, it should be good for things like money. Although we must remember that Mercury is now going retrograde, and it will be retrograde, well, for the rest of the year. So, you know, we have to be careful here. We don't want to make new commitments. We don't want to make financial plans which we're going to work on right now, because when Mercury is retrograde, it can mess things up. You know, Mercury can messes things up, particularly if we believe in astrology. I think I have this theory that if you don't believe in astrology, maybe Mercury going retrograde isn't quite so bad. But if you're listening to me now, you probably do believe in astrology. So Mercury retrograde, we do have to watch out for that. I mean, maybe I'm just being too skeptical there. I do have a skeptical streak. I'm sorry, but okay. So yeah, so it's quite a staid day on the surface. However, there are some midpoints we need to be aware of. If you look at, here's Saturn. See, 1 degree Pisces. There's Mars. There's Uranus. If you see, Saturn is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. That is problematic. You know, Mars-Uranus is the principle of violence. You know, not necessarily physical violence, but you know, maybe violent language, violent thoughts, being very tense. We need to do something about it. We need to you know, get our energy out, and yeah, we have to be careful with that. And so Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint is about incredible tension. So a lot of us may be feeling actually very tense. You know, on the surface we've got, you know, Moon conjunct Mercury and Capricorn, very staid and whatever. But under the surface, some people are really, really tense with Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, almost to the point of wanting to explode. Maybe some people will explode. You know, looking at the world, it's going to be a tense place. At the same time, Mars is square. There's Mars is square the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. So in a way, that's more of the same. And it gives a very different message, though, to that Mercury in Capricorn I was just talking about. If Mars is on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint, that is about verbal explosions. You know, Mercury-Uranus is about our thoughts moving really quickly, having dramatic thoughts, dramatic ideas, and then Mars on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint, squaring the Mercury-Uranus midpoint, it all comes out, it asserts itself. So this is a situation where the midpoints are possibly giving a rather different picture from the sort of the surface appearance of the horoscope. One final thing is the North Node. The North Node here is there's the Mars-Saturn midpoint. The North Node is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, when you're looking at midpoints, the North Node is not. It's not just that it's about karma. The North Node, in particularly if you look at the work of Reinhold Ebertin and the Hamburg School in Germany, the North Node is seen as being about connections, and so the midpoint that the North Node occupies is about the kind of connections we're dealing with today. And so North Node square Mars-Saturn may be that some of the connections, some of the people out there are thinking quite negatively. There may be a sense of depression, perhaps, or people dwelling on death and destruction. This is about this. It can be about death and people people being influenced by death. I mean, I'll give you an idea. I'm just going to show you. This is Alfred Witter's Rules for Planetary Pictures. This is almost the Bible of the Hamburg School, and I'll just see what they say about Mars-Saturn. So Mars-Saturn, North Node on the Mars-Saturn. It's quite grim, actually. To be taken ill, cases of death, funerals, interruption of connections, quarrels. So in certain situations, there might be a somewhat funereal atmosphere. I suppose it depends where you are. Although the North Node, I wouldn't take it too personally. It might be just about the world outside. It's not about you necessarily. It's about some of the connections around you. So that is something to consider. Now, as far as my forecasts for the 12 signs are concerned, as usual, I have done them, and these are my forecasts for today, which is Thursday, December the 14th, 2023. Aries, you're clear about yourself and your aims, and you're able to keep clear of distractions. At the same time, you have a good understanding of the world around you, and you can use your intelligence to find the best way of moving forward. But sometimes an extra push is required, diverting large amounts of power to a single point of resistance. Taurus, at first you might think that there are no options, that the path ahead of you is set. But if you look around and analyse the situation, you'll see clear choices. This does make it complicated because it's often easier to be told what to do, but a bit of independent thinking can open up many opportunities. Gemini, it's a day for reworking old ground. You might think that you've already covered everything, but on a second pass you'll realise how much you have actually missed. But you must concentrate very hard, and if possible you should use your feelings to get to the bottom of the matter. Elsewhere, Geminis can verbalise the emotions that others can't mention. Cancer, it's a day for collecting information. You can read the news, read documents, listen to what people say, and don't forget the random gossip. And once you've got the information together, you'll be in a better position to make things happen. Also, the things people don't talk about are the things that matter. Leo, there's stuff to do. It might not be very interesting, but you don't really have a choice. Okay, you could postpone it until later, but really the time for action is now. After a moment of anguish, you'll cover a lot of ground very quickly. But when dealing with other people, treat them with a certain sense of equality. We don't want any sense of hierarchy today. That would be bad. So there is going to be this perception of individual differences, that I'm better than you, you're better than me, that kind of thing. So, and that could cause a lot of strife for Leos. So when you deal with people, when you talk to people, you must deal with them as equals. Virgo, you feel that you need a break, perhaps to catch your breath or to catch up with friends. Okay, you could postpone it until later, but let me start again. Virgo, you feel that you need a break, perhaps to catch your breath or to catch up with friends. But if you bring things to a halt, it may be difficult to get things going again. So if possible, you need to keep the momentum going. You do stuff that you enjoy, and because you don't stop, you eventually find real satisfaction. Libra, there are people out there who need your time, but not necessarily very much of it. Sometimes a few seconds is all it takes. Being ready to listen to a question and give an answer. And don't underestimate your counselling skills, because on a psychological level, you've got the healing touch. Scorpio, you're able to ground things. After all, the Moon and Mercury are in Capricorn, moving through the communication sector of your solar chart, pointing out the material facts without exaggeration or embellishment. It's true that some people can't handle the truth, but if you get a bad reaction, that's not your fault. Sagittarius. As a sign, Sagittarius has a reputation for being wild but honest. But today, your honesty is more focused, concentrating on financial details. You can see the way things are, and you're ready to make changes to your finances so as to align with reality. If it is not necessary, you don't need to buy it. And that applies to Christmas presents as well. Capricorn, it's a day for it's a day for experimentation in a gentle, down-to-earth way. You've been doing things one way for long enough, and it's now time to consider alternative approaches. But it's not about revolutions. Instead, it's about adaptation. Small changes, checking out how they impact the time and effort you spend on a task. You'll be well pleased with this effort. Aquarius, you don't have to do anything, at least in a social sense. Your contributions may not be particularly useful because you and the rest of the world may be on different wavelengths. But don't worry, this is just a passing phase, and soon enough you'll find your voice. When you're on your own, you are most effective. Pisces, you've got your views, but there's no harm in seeing what other people have to say. One person in particular, perhaps a partner or a close friend, is being very sensible, and they can break down and rationalize the most complicated situations. And just because someone appears boring doesn't mean that they should be ignored. So let's now look at today from a different perspective, from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for people watching this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 7, the army. Now, that's a very dramatic thing to say, the army. And this is perhaps a reminder, as some people have suggested that, I think Greg Winkup has suggested that the I Ching originally, when it was originally created, was for sort of nobles and perhaps lords and that kind of thing. It wasn't written for ordinary people. So if you're a noble or a lord or whatever, you may have access to, in China, I don't know, in 1000 BC or whatever, you might have had access to armies and whatever. So ordinary people, most of us do not have access to armies. Nonetheless, the army is the hexagram we have. So the army is about marshalling our resources and getting results, or at least trying to get results. So I think that's much of what we're trying to do. Now, that could be our social resources, the people we know. So this would be particularly appropriate if we're maybe at work in a position of responsibility. We're trying to get things done. We've got people working under us. I suppose it could be happening in the family. But if we're on our own, it's just all the resources we have naturally, not necessarily just the people we know. It could be about the things we know, that kind of thing. So that's what we're trying to do. And there are two moving lines here. The fourth line moves and the fifth line moves. And the fourth line is about retreat. So we're trying to do something, we're trying to achieve something, and we hit a hurdle. We can't go any further. We would be advised to stop right there. But I mean, this is not a disgrace, retreating. It's just accepting that we've hit a block. But we keep moving. We don't keep moving. We keep trying to work out what to do, and we are able to stabilize the situation. I suppose from a military perspective, you might say stabilizing the front. That's what perhaps this hexagram is all about. So I don't know if you happen to be watching this and you're on the front line in Russia or Ukraine, then my advice to you would be to stabilize the front. And you're a Russian or a Ukrainian officer, then of course you won't be watching this. But you would want to be. It's not a time for moving forward. Just stabilize what you've got. So you have to think about what does that mean in your everyday life. If stabilizing the front, that's what you need to do. Don't go any further. Then this hexagram 7, the army, it moves. It moves to hexagram 47, which is oppression. This means on the surface that we're stuck. But what it really means is that we just got, we have stabilized the front, but it's hard work, and we've actually got a lot to deal with. It's difficult to relax and enjoy ourselves. We've just got to cope. Now, that doesn't mean to say we can't cope. We will cope. We will get through. We will accomplish many of our goals. Remembering, we're trying to keep the front stable. We're trying to keep things going. Look at all the responsibilities we've got. We're trying to keep all that going. And we will succeed. But it's going to be hard work. It's going to be oppressive. Having to do stuff for other people. Having to be in lots of places at once. Having to deal with this oppressive weight on our shoulders. It's hard, but don't worry, we can deal with it, and we can get through the day. And even if we're not in the best of moods, we will have made solid progress, given the resources that are available to us. Okay, so that's the I Ching, and what I want to do now is go back to the astrology. And at this stage, things might be a bit chaotic. So the first chart I want to look at is the chart for the isolation of plutonium. I mean, I've looked at this chart before. Now, why is it such an important chart? Now, Pluto was discovered, I think, in 1930, and it had been called Pluto. I believe it was actually called Pluto not after the god of the underworld, but actually after the Disney character. Is Pluto some dog? And I think that's the case. So there's a somewhat banal origin to Pluto, the planet, and Pluto, of course, is also a god, and we already had uranium, and I think Neptunium had been discovered by that stage. And there was this thing, so it was logical, naming elements after the god to have this new element, this discovered element, named after Pluto. That's the Pluto is the Roman equivalent of Hades. And so this is apparently the moment of the isolation of plutonium in Berkeley, California, at 8 p.m. on December the 14th, 1940. Now, what is really important about this chart is the position of Pluto. At 8 p.m., the ascendant was at 4 degrees 40 Leo. Pluto was at 4 degrees Leo, exactly at 4 degrees Leo. So Pluto was rising. Pluto was isolated. And the fact that Pluto is reflected in this chart, that Pluto configures this, is such a major influence, is the rising planet, indicates to me that Pluto works. So Pluto certainly works in terms of this chart. So I don't know how the unconscious works, how the collective unconscious works, how it all links to someone naming a planet after a Disney character called Pluto, and then this links into this element and how it all comes together. But yes, it does work. And so Pluto was rising at the time of its discovery, and I think this is clear evidence that we should be using Pluto. I don't think Pluto works as well as Neptune, and I don't think Neptune works as well as Uranus, but I think we should not be ignoring Pluto. I mean, I know to some of you that might seem absolutely obvious that we should be using Pluto, but to me it's not obvious. But I think this chart does show the importance of Pluto. So that's really all I wanted to say about Pluto, and it is the anniversary. It's the 83rd anniversary of the isolation of Pluto. So that's that. Then there is, well, I suppose in a sense this was a tragic chart because plutonium has caused so many deaths, but on the other hand, I suppose plutonium has other applications. I suppose for spacecraft, it's used for batteries, and of course you've got nuclear power, and you might regard that as a benefit. But of course, the first atomic bomb was made by Pluto. Nagasaki the first atomic bomb was based on plutonium. The bomb that killed so many people on Nagasaki was based on plutonium. So there is a certain tragedy to this chart. But another tragedy was, of course, Sandy Hook, which happened 11 years ago. So this is a chart for Sandy Hook. December the 14th, 2012, and I think Adam Lanza started his shooting at around 9:35 a.m. It all happened very quickly. Now, I am not claiming that this chart wonderfully describes the event, that one would have, stayed at home if one's seen this chart. I'm not claiming that at all. This is completely post hoc. It's completely after the event, 2020 hindsight, all that kind of stuff. So what do we notice? Okay, there is, you can see that Mars is at, you've got 27 Capricorn rising, and so you've got Mars at 21.5 rising. So you could say that it had a Mars feel, but Mars is not exactly on the ascendant. So that's when was the body of Mars? Mars was actually on the ascendant at 9:18. Mars was actually on the horizon the physical body of Mars was on the horizon at 9:18. So that was quite some. It was what, a quarter of an hour beforehand. So yeah, I'm not making any great claims about this chart. Mercury is trine Uranus. You could say that Mercury trine Uranus is about news. It's about unexpected and sudden news. Now, that news can be good or bad. It's just about news. It's certainly not indicating. It's certainly not indicating a shooting. So, if we want to have some sort of a better understanding of Sandy Hook, it might be better to look at the horoscope of the person who did the shooting, which was Adam Lanza. Again, I don't really want to spend much time on his chart. He was born on April 22nd, 1992. We don't have a time, at least I don't have a time. Notice he's a Taurus. He was a Taurus. 2 degrees 46 Taurus at midday on the day he was born. Taurians, when they get involved in this kind of thing, they are very single-minded. Once they've made a decision they're going to do something, they just do it. Timothy McVeigh, who blew up that building in Oklahoma and killed, I think, over 100 people. He killed a huge amount of people. He was concerned about the government and people, the government getting involved in people's lives and taking away their guns, and he thought he really had to do something about it. Yeah, he was a Taurus, and he just went and did it. He didn't just talk about it. He did it. English history, Guy Fawkes, who attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. He was actually, if you correct for calendars, he was born on the same day as Timothy McVeigh. This idea of blowing up the British Houses of Parliament to blow up what he saw as sort of a Protestant government, Protestant king. He wasn't happy about it. He was a Catholic. I think he probably believed this is a good way of bringing back Catholicism. He did it. Well, he tried to do it. He would have done it if he hadn't have been caught and arrested. So that is a feature of Taurus. So anyone else or most other people, they'd have all their plans and guns and whatever, and they perhaps wouldn't actually put it into action. But he went and did it. And so there is a single-mindedness to Taurus. Aside from that, I don't have a time of birth, and it does make things difficult. There's nothing completely spectacular about this chart. And I don't even think that there's anything really spectacular about what was going on in his chart when he actually did the shooting. Now, the moon at the time of the shooting was at the time of at 9:35 on December the 14th was at 10:38 Capricorn. Now, the noon position of Adam Lanza's the midday position was 8 Capricorn. So he did it around the time of his lunar return. And we have to remember that just before he went to the school and did the shooting, he killed his mother. So this is probably a very moon kind of thing. The moon is the mother. We don't have a time of birth. We don't really know precisely what was going on, and I think it's really difficult to say anything because we don't know where his moon is. I think if we did know where his moon was, then I think we would be in a better position to say what was actually going on in his life. at that particular time. I mean, he, if you know, one thing, remember I just said that there was a Mercury trine Jupiter at the time of the shooting. So Mercury was at 448 Gemini, and his Jupiter was at 444 Virgo. So whatever was going on in his head at the time, that somehow triggered him with that Jupiter in Virgo. To Jupiter, I suppose, is about excessive behavior, but it's all very vague. So what I'm really saying is it's not a chart with Sandy Hook, even with Lanza, particularly with no time. Really difficult to say much. One final thing we might want to look at with this is the lunation before the shooting. So there was a new moon. There was a new moon the day before Sandy Hook. So set for Sandy Hook, Connecticut. It's true that Saturn was on the ascendant at the time of the shooting. At the day before the shooting, at the exact time of the new moon, Saturn was rising. So that would suggest maybe that something difficult would happen there. But again, it is somewhat vague. So I think I don't think we can read much from this. But what about the United States? How did this event impact the US? Because it was a major event. I know school shootings have been happening. There's always, every month there seems to be a school shooting or whatever, but this one was particularly bad. There was Columbine, was that in the late 90s? But I suppose because this one was an elementary school, I think this was possibly, in terms of the impact on the nation, this was probably the worst. So how did it impact the nation? So here's the USA's chart, set July the 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. This is on the outside. We've got the chart of the shooting. You can see that Uranus is quite close to the United States' IC, but it's not exactly there. But Uranus is right on America's Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So, Venus-Jupiter conjunction that America has in Cancer, that says a lot about America's optimism. Jupiter works very well in Cancer. It's the benefics. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is the lesser benefic, and they're in conjunction. So that's great. And then Uranus comes along and squares the midpoint. Pretty much exactly on that. So it is a disruption to America's good feelings about itself. People, it's a question about what's this about? Why did this happen? It's an attack. It's an attack on your Moon, Venus, Jupiter. You could say it's about the family. The family is very important to America. I mean, at least in a mythological sense. I don't know whether it's real, but in a mythological sense, the family is important to the United States. And of course, it's a Cancerian country. But that Venus-Jupiter conjunction was really hit by the Uranus. And then Mercury, you see, Mercury was at 448 at the time of the shooting. So I don't know whether you should use quincunxes to midpoints, but Mercury was 150 degrees. Normally I don't use 150 degree aspects with midpoints. So Mercury is sort of moving away from a quincunx to Venus, applying to a quincunx of Jupiter, and it's actually quincunxing the midpoint. So I think that Mercury-Uranus trine, which was exact at the time of the shooting, it is about news, dramatic news, and it really hit the United States' Venus-Jupiter conjunction. One other point is that at the time of the shooting, the ascendant was at 2740 Capricorn, and the United States' Pluto is at 2733 Capricorn. So that shooting, that ascendant, was hitting America's Pluto, and that Pluto, America's just had its Pluto return, and maybe that Pluto in America's chart is its dark secret, is the darkness in America. It's also the obsessions in America. It brings out the obsessiveness of people in America. It brings out the division in America. And I think that Sandy Hook certainly did that, with particular reference to guns and the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is just one of the things which is dividing America. That people are sort of passionate on both sides. And I suppose you could say it's, what we got is info wars. And that brings me to the chart of Alex Jones. So Alex Jones is... Alex Jones, he is the sort of right-wing radio host. I don't know a great deal about him, but he's a very successful radio host, commentator. There's his chart, February 11th, 1974. I don't know what time he's born. He's born I think, in Dallas, Texas. And he made comments after the Sandy Hook shooting, suggesting that perhaps the shooting didn't happen, and perhaps seeing it as a conspiracy. I mean, what better conspiracy if you want to take away people's guns and to make up to make up a story about a shooting? I mean, that was his line. I mean, that seems a bit crazy to me, but he doubled down on it, and as a result, a court has ordered that he pay, I think, $1.5 billion to the families of the victims. So what is it? What is it about Alex Jones that makes him do that? So he's an Aquarius, probably with the Moon in Libra. Now you might think Alex Jones has got the Moon in Libra. We don't know for sure whether he's got the Moon in Libra. If he was born very late on February the 11th, the Moon would be in Scorpio. But the Moon in Libra is all about balance. It understands the balance in society. It knows how it works. And so most people in Moon in Libra are going to want to, keep the balance. But if you understand the balance, you actually know how to overthrow it. And he's got his Moon conjunct Uranus. Uranus is extremely disruptive. So someone with Moon conjunct Uranus really does know how to cause disruption. And look, he's got Venus. He's got Venus square Uranus. He's got Moon conjunct, Moon square Venus. So that's disrupting the fabric of society, perhaps disrupting relationships and so forth. So that's what he's got in his chart. Now, being a radio host, being a communicator, you would think that his Mercury would be important, and you can see that there's his Mercury. Now his Mercury is in Pisces. That is not a great place to have your that's not really a great place to have your Mercury. Mercury rules Virgo, and so in Pisces it's in its detriment. So Mercury in Pisces can get confused. Mercury in Pisces can also be overly influenced by what's going on in society. Pisces, it's the sea, water, whatever's going on. And so if he glums onto this sort of alt-right world, people with conspiracy theories, he can just mentally become part of these conspiracy theories, and then his Mercury is square Neptune. So that's just, that is very confusing. He can, I think, get into things without quite understanding what he's getting into. And we should remember that the two communication planets are Mercury and the Moon. I mean, maybe most of his communication happens through his Moon in Libra conjunct Uranus. Mercury square Neptune may be about how he's relating to the facts, how he's comparing the facts with his support base, and everything's kind of getting mixed up. So when the Sandy Hook shooting, he decided to comment on it. Now it's quite clear that all those people, a lot of people died, yet he bizarrely claimed that it was part of a conspiracy, but it didn't. But it was just there to perhaps discredit the gun lobby, and it certainly had a dramatic impact on him. Oh, in the end, he was banned from Twitter, and I think he just got his Twitter account back, or his X account back. So, what was Sandy Hook doing to Alex Jones? So there is Alex Jones's chart is in the middle. Sandy Hook is on the outer wheel, and I just want to point out really one thing. His Mercury-Neptune square. There's his Mercury-Neptune square, and look, Jupiter in Gemini at 9:45. 9:45 Gemini. So Jupiter was hitting his Mercury, hitting his Neptune. It was on his Mercury-Neptune midpoint. And Jupiter was in Gemini. Now, Jupiter does not work well in Gemini. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, therefore it's in its detriment in Gemini. So Jupiter is a big idea, and it doesn't do well when it's trying to dig down to these little sort of facts and all this kind of stuff. And this seems to be what's happened. It seems that as soon as the Sandy Hook shooting happened, that Jupiter just hit Alex Jones's Mercury-Neptune square, and it just went on and on and on, and he got himself into a situation where he ended up with being asked to pay $1.5 billion. So this was an incredibly destructive financially. This event represented, I suppose, financial destruction for Alex Jones. And in his case, I would have said that the culprit was that Jupiter in Gemini. That Jupiter in Gemini triggered his Mercury-Neptune square, and it just wouldn't go away. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Alex Jones. I don't have a time of birth for him. I do find looking at the Sandy Hook charts and how they link to the USA, and I just don't. I don't find the links that I'd like to see. I mean, I don't. For some reason, the astrology is not providing, to me, a convincing portrayal of everything that was going on. But nonetheless, I think I can't just only look at events where the astrology is obvious. I need to look at events where the astrology doesn't really seem to work so well. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.